It was a calm October morning in the small town of Willow Creek, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and nothing truly bad ever happened. Until it did. 5-year-old Annie Lou Whitmore tugged gently at the leash in her tiny hand as she stepped off the porch, bundled in her pink sweater. Her new puppy, Bo, a strong young German shepherd with ears too big for his head, bounded down the steps beside her, tail wagging. The air smelled like damp leaves and fireplace smoke, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under her sneakers. From the kitchen window, Marybeth Whitmore watched her daughter closely. She had her hand wrapped around a coffee mug, but the coffee had gone cold. There was something about the morning that made her stomach tighten, a heaviness in the silence. Still, she managed to smile as Annie turned back and waved. Just to the stop sign and back, Marybeth called through the open window. Nowhere else. Annie nodded quickly and turned away, her blonde hair bouncing with each step. Annie loved walking Bo. It made her feel grown up, like she was showing him the world for the very first time. The two moved slowly along the sidewalk, past trimmed lawns and Halloween decorations that had started to sag in the cool air. Just as they passed the Whitmore mailbox, Bo stopped suddenly. His ears perked, and his body stiffened. Annie looked up, confused. "What is it, boy?" she asked, kneeling to check his collar. That's when she noticed the black car. It was parked across the street, engine off, windows dark. Nothing moved inside, but something about it felt wrong. Bo growled, low and deep, the kind of sound that didn't match his usual playful bark. Annie had never heard that sound from him before. She stood up, suddenly unsure. Then a door creaked open. Marybeth dropped her mug the second she heard it. The sharp, unmistakable scream of a child. It wasn't long. It wasn't repeated, but it pierced the quiet like a knife. She bolted from the kitchen, flung open the front door, and her heart stopped. The sidewalk was empty. The leash lay curled on the grass like a question mark. "Annie?" she shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just silence. The kind that doesn't belong in a place like Willow Creek. And Bo was gone too. Marybeth ran barefoot across the front yard, gravel cutting into her feet, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out her thoughts. She reached the sidewalk and stared in all directions, searching for any sign of movement. There were no children laughing, no barking, no black car, nothing. Only the leash, still lying there, with its metal clasp open, like it had been unhooked on purpose. The wind picked up and rustled the leaves around her. But that scream, Annie's scream, still echoed in her ears like it had just happened. She sprinted to the end of the block, calling Annie's name again and again. The neighbors hadn't come out, not yet. Most of them were still inside, sipping coffee or watching morning TV. Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where people expected anything dangerous to happen before noon. Marybeth's voice cracked as she screamed for her daughter again, her panic rising with every unanswered call. She knocked on doors, banged on windows. Finally, Mrs. Langston, a retired teacher across the street, opened her door, still in her robe. "Marybeth? What's going on?" "She's gone," Marybeth gasped. "Annie's gone. And Bo too." Mrs. Langston's face turned white as she looked past Marybeth at the empty sidewalk. Without asking more, she grabbed her cordless phone and started dialing 911. Marybeth, trembling, dropped to her knees where the leash had been. She picked it up slowly, as if it might explain something. But it didn't. It was just a leash. No blood, no struggle, no paw prints. Bo was big, strong. He wouldn't have let her go without a fight. Minutes later, sirens echoed in the distance. Sheriff Walt Granger was the first to arrive. He pulled up in his pickup, boots already on the pavement before the truck stopped rolling. "Marybeth," he said carefully, approaching her like she might break. "Tell me what happened." She tried to speak, but her voice failed. She pointed toward the end of the street. A car, black, tinted windows. Bo growled. Then Annie screamed. "I didn't see it happen. I heard it." Walt's jaw tightened. He turned to his deputy, who had just pulled in behind him. "Get units checking every exit out of town. We need eyes on the freeway and Route 11. Now. Marybeth sat on the curb, clutching the leash, rocking slightly. Her mind flipped between memories of Annie's giggle that morning and the scream that ended it. She felt like she was in a dream or a nightmare with no way to wake up. Somewhere in Willow Creek, a child had vanished, and time was already slipping away. Sheriff Walt Granger stood over the spot where the leash had been found, his boots crunching the dry leaves underfoot. He crouched down, studying the sidewalk like it might speak. His eyes scanned the edges of the grass, the concrete, the tire tracks fading into the dirt near the curb. He'd seen a lot in his 30 years on the force: drunk drivers, break-ins, even the occasional overdose. But a missing child? In Willow Creek? That was something else entirely. Something colder. "There are no skid marks," he muttered. "Whoever was here didn't leave in a hurry." Deputy Mills returned from the other end of the street, shaking his head. "No cameras on this block. Not even a Ring doorbell. Quiet street. Just trees and old folks." Granger sighed deeply. Time was slipping fast, and if someone had taken Annie, they were likely miles away already. He turned to Marybeth, who was still seated on the curb, pale and silent, holding the leash so tight her knuckles were white. "Marybeth," he said gently, kneeling in front of her. "Has Bo ever acted out before? Growled at anyone?" She blinked, as if coming out of a trance. "Never. He's still just a puppy. Big, but gentle. He plays with the mailman." Her voice cracked. "But this morning, something was different." He froze. "Growled like he saw something I didn't." Granger nodded slowly. "Dogs know things. They smell things. Sometimes before we do." He stood again and looked at the tree line at the end of the street. "I want to bring in a tracker. If Bo ran, maybe he didn't run far. Maybe he left us something to follow." By early afternoon, the scent dog arrived, a bloodhound named Daisy, handled by a seasoned search and rescue officer from the neighboring county. Marybeth stood beside Granger as Daisy was brought to the spot where the leash had been dropped. The handler opened a Ziploc bag with Annie's pink sweater inside. Daisy sniffed it, circled the grass, then began pulling hard toward the woods that bordered the end of the road. "She's got something," the handler called. "Strong scent." Marybeth's heart leapt and dropped at the same time. Hope and fear were a cruel combination. She followed close behind the officers as they moved into the trees, branches cracking under their boots. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Just birds and the occasional creak of a tree swaying. After 10 minutes of walking, Daisy suddenly stopped. Her nose went to the ground. She let out a soft whimper. At her feet was something small, a pink shoelace, torn and muddy. Marybeth recognized it instantly. It was from Annie's left sneaker. Marybeth stared at the shoelace in the dirt, her legs threatening to give out. She didn't need to pick it up to know it was Annie's. She had tied that shoe herself that morning, double-knotted like always. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment, the forest around her faded into a blur. Sheriff Granger gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're on the right path," he said, his voice steady but tight. Bo stayed with her. This could mean they're still close. Daisy sniffed around the spot again, circling, then pulled the leash toward a narrow trail barely visible through the underbrush. The group followed, quieter now, the weight of the discovery settling in. As they moved deeper into the woods, the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows that made everything feel more fragile. A gust of cold wind blew through, and Marybeth wrapped her arms around herself, feeling both physically and emotionally exposed. They came to a small clearing near a dried-up creek bed. There, beside an overturned log, were fresh paw prints, large and deep. "Bo's," the handler confirmed. "Still wet. Could be minutes old." Marybeth's heart surged. Bo was still out there. And if Bo was near, maybe Annie was too. Daisy barked once and pulled left, toward a thicket of tall grass. As they pushed through, a rustling noise came from ahead. Everyone froze. Suddenly, Bo appeared, muddy, panting, and limping slightly from his front leg. His fur was matted with dirt and leaves, and there was a small cut near his eye. But his eyes were locked on Marybeth the moment he saw her. He ran to her, whining, tail wagging, nudging her with his nose. "Bo!" she cried, dropping to her knees and hugging him tightly. "Where's Annie? Where is she, boy?" Bo pulled away and turned, walking a few feet ahead, then looking back, as if saying, "Follow me." Granger stepped beside her. "He's leading us." The officers readied themselves, adrenaline building. Marybeth stood and followed Bo, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like thunder in her ears. The dog led them around a bend, into a dense cluster of trees where the air smelled different, damp and metallic. And then they saw it. A small, dirt-covered blanket spread on the ground near the base of a tree. A juice box, a single stuffed animal lying on its side. But no Annie. Bo sat down beside it, ears back, whining. Whatever had happened here had just happened. And Annie was no longer with him. Marybeth stood frozen, her eyes locked on the small scene before her. Annie's blanket was half buried under loose dirt and leaves, like someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. The juice box lay tipped on its side, leaking into the soil. Bo stayed still beside the stuffed animal, letting out a soft, steady whine that cut deeper than any scream. He kept glancing into the trees beyond the clearing, alert, waiting, watching. Marybeth's stomach turned. It felt like Annie had been there just moments ago, and someone had taken her again. Sheriff Granger slowly stepped forward, crouching beside the blanket. He pulled on gloves and carefully examined the scene. "There are boot prints here," he said quietly, motioning to the ground near the edge of the dirt. "Adult male. Deep. He was carrying something, or someone." Marybeth swallowed hard, covering her mouth with one hand. Her eyes darted toward the woods. "Why would they stop here?" she whispered. "Why leave her things behind?" Deputy Mills answered from behind a tree. "Maybe they heard us coming. Maybe Bo fought him off, and he panicked." Granger turned to Marybeth. "Bo stayed with her, probably fought to protect her. But if the man took her again, we're dealing with someone who's thinking ahead. Someone who knows these woods." The wind rustled through the leaves, and Marybeth noticed how quiet the forest had become. No birds, no insects, just tension hanging in the cold air. Bo suddenly stood and began pacing in tight circles, sniffing the ground, then bolting toward a narrow animal path that curved deeper into the woods. He stopped, looked back, barked once. "He's got something again," the handler said, gripping Daisy's leash tighter. Marybeth didn't hesitate. She followed Bo without waiting for permission. "He knows where she went," she called back. "He's trying to show us." They pushed through branches and thorns, the trees closing in tighter the farther they went. Bo moved fast, driven by something beyond instinct. It was like he was chasing time itself. After 5 more minutes of tense walking, they emerged onto an old dirt service road, barely wide enough for a small car. At the edge of the road, fresh tire tracks, still damp from the morning dew. "This is how he got her out," Granger said, kneeling to examine the marks. Marybeth stared at the tracks, trying to breathe, trying not to fall apart. The direction pointed west, toward the state line, toward emptiness. She dropped her gaze to the ground again, and spotted something half buried in the mud. It was Annie's sock, and next to it, a crumpled photo, torn down the middle. Marybeth knelt slowly, her hands shaking as she picked up the mud-streaked photograph. Half of it was missing, torn cleanly down the center. The side she held showed Annie, smiling in a backyard lawn chair, arms wrapped around Bo when he was still a tiny pup. But what chilled Marybeth wasn't the photo itself. It was the fact that this particular picture had been taken only weeks earlier and had never left her house. This was on the fridge," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "How did he get this?" Sheriff Granger took the photo from her gently, examining it with narrowed eyes. "You're sure this was inside your home?" She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't post pictures online. I don't share much. This was a printed photo from Walgreens. I taped it to the refrigerator myself." Granger looked toward the woods, his expression darkening. Then we're not dealing with a stranger. He's been watching you. Inside your house, maybe even before today. Bo growled low and deep, his ears pinned back as he sniffed near the bushes lining the dirt road. He began to pace again, unsettled. Marybeth turned to the sheriff, her voice tight. How long has he been watching? Did he come into my house while we were sleeping? Was he there this morning? The thought sent a chill crawling up her spine. Every unlocked window, every creak in the night she'd brushed off. They weren't harmless anymore. They were evidence, and she hadn't seen it. Deputy Mills was already on the radio, calling for backup and a forensics team to sweep the Whitmore home. Granger stood, holding the torn photo between two gloved fingers. He left this here for a reason. He wants you to know he's close, and he wants you to feel powerless. Marybeth shook her head. No, I won't be powerless. Not again. We find her. Today. Bo barked once, loud and sharp, then took off down the road at full speed, following the curve that led deeper into the trees. The team chased after him, running through the brush and stumbling over roots. The light was beginning to fade now, making everything feel more urgent. Suddenly, Bo stopped near an old, rusted gate half buried in overgrowth. Beyond it stood the remains of a long-abandoned cabin, barely visible through the trees. The front door was hanging by one hinge. Bo stood still, ears forward, tail straight, silent now. Marybeth stepped forward. Is she in there? Granger raised his hand. Nobody moves alone, he said. We go in together. The woods fell completely silent as the group approached the old cabin. Sheriff Granger held up a closed fist, signaling everyone to stop. The building looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Wood rotted, vines curling around the posts, windows boarded haphazardly. But the footprints in the dirt told a different story. Someone had been there recently. Marybeth's heart pounded in her ears. Bo stood by the broken gate, muscles tense, eyes locked on the front door as if waiting for it to move. Granger motioned to Deputy Mills to flank the back while he took the front with his weapon drawn. Marybeth didn't want to wait. Every second felt like another breath Annie might be struggling to take without her. You said we'd go together, she whispered. Granger gave her a look, a mix of stern professionalism and compassion, then nodded. Stay behind me. Stay quiet. Bo led the way, ears twitching, every step cautious. As they stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards groaned beneath their weight. The door creaked open with one gentle push. Inside, it was dark and musty, the smell of mildew and something metallic lingering in the air. A thin stream of light pushed through a crack in the boarded-up window, revealing dust floating like ash. Old furniture was covered in sheets, and newspapers from years past were stacked in corners. But what caught Marybeth's attention wasn't the mess. It was the sound. Faint, rhythmic, breathing. Bo moved first, heading to the far corner of the room near a toppled dresser. His nose pressed against the floorboards, then he barked sharply. Once. Granger and Marybeth rushed over. There, half hidden behind the dresser, was a small trapdoor, the wood newer than everything else in the cabin. Granger knelt, inspecting the edges. Recently built. Not original to the house, he said. With one swift motion, he yanked it open, revealing a short set of steps descending into darkness. A foul, damp smell rushed up as the trapdoor opened, making Marybeth gag. But she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the flashlight from Granger's belt and descended before he could stop her. Bo followed close behind. The room below was cold, concrete floor, stone walls. And in the farthest corner, behind a thin curtain of old bedsheets, was a small figure huddled on a cot. Marybeth's flashlight beam shook as it landed on blonde hair. The figure flinched, then looked up with wide, terrified eyes. It was Annie, alive. Bruised, but alive, and she wasn't alone. A shadow moved just behind the curtain. Marybeth froze, her flashlight trembling in her grip as she stared at the shape behind the curtain. Annie whimpered softly, eyes wide, body curled on the edge of the cot. Bo stood between them, low growl rumbling in his throat, his eyes locked on the darkness behind the thin sheet. Sheriff Granger rushed down the steps just in time to see Marybeth inching forward. "Stop!" he barked. "Don't move." The curtain stirred again, and a low voice came from the shadows. "No one has to get hurt." Granger drew his weapon, stepping in front of Marybeth and shining his own flashlight directly at the sheet. "Come out. Hands where I can see them." There was silence. Then, slowly, a man stepped into view, shielding his eyes from the light. He looked rough, disheveled hair, unshaven face, a worn flannel jacket stained with dirt. His hands were raised, trembling slightly, but his eyes weren't wild. They were tired, broken. Granger squinted. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Clint," the man muttered. "Clint Harlan." Marybeth's breath caught. That name, she'd heard it before. Her late husband, Tommy, had mentioned it years ago. A childhood friend he'd lost touch with. Someone who'd disappeared after a bad stretch. "I didn't hurt her," Clint said quickly. "I found her. In the woods. Crying. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it was better if I didn't get involved." Granger stepped forward, weapon still raised. "You took her here. You hid her." Clint looked down. "Yeah, but not for the reasons you think." Marybeth rushed past Granger and dropped to her knees beside Annie, pulling her into a trembling embrace. The child clung to her, face buried in her mother's shoulder. "He didn't touch me, Mama," Annie whispered. "He gave me water. He told me you were coming." Marybeth turned her head toward Clint, torn between fury and confusion. "Then who took her?" she asked, voice sharp. Clint hesitated. "I don't know his name, but I saw him. He left her. Just walked away. Didn't even check if anyone was watching. Like he didn't care." Granger cuffed Clint's hands and called for backup, but part of him hesitated. Something didn't add up. If Clint was lying, he was either a master manipulator or deeply unstable. "We'll figure this out at the station," he muttered. Marybeth didn't care. Not yet. All she could feel was Annie's tiny heartbeat against her chest. But Bo was still staring at the stairs. And as the team began to exit the basement, he growled again, louder this time, toward the open trapdoor above. Everyone froze as Bo growled louder, his eyes fixed on the trapdoor above. His body lowered, tense, tail stiff. Sheriff Granger raised his hand for silence and stepped back toward the base of the stairs, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. "There's someone else up there," he said under his breath. Annie clung tightly to Marybeth, burying her face against her mother's chest. Clint sat quietly against the wall, cuffed, his head tilted toward the sound above. "I told you," he said, voice low. "He didn't come alone." The sound of slow footsteps creaked across the floorboards above. Deliberate, heavy, not panicked. Whoever it was, they weren't running. Granger motioned to Deputy Mills, who had just arrived at the trapdoor entrance, weapon drawn. "Hold position," Granger whispered. "We don't know who or what we're dealing with." Bo let out a sharp bark, startling everyone in the cramped basement. Then silence again, the kind of silence that screams. Then a voice. "You shootin'." As Bo's growl deepened, everyone turned toward the open trapdoor. His ears were pinned back, body rigid, teeth slightly bared. Sheriff Granger motioned for everyone to go silent. He raised his weapon again and slowly climbed the creaky wooden stairs. Marybeth held Annie tight, shielding her behind her body. Clint remained cuffed in the corner, not saying a word. Even he looked unsettled by Bo's reaction. Granger stepped carefully onto the cabin floor above. The afternoon light was nearly gone, the woods outside darkening with the fall dusk. Something moved across the porch, just a flicker of motion in his peripheral vision. He whipped around, gun raised. "Show yourself," he shouted. Silence. Then a voice came, calm and low. "I was hoping you wouldn't find her." From the trees, a man stepped into view. Average build, late 40s, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. His hands were empty, but his eyes cold, detached, told a different story. Granger kept his weapon trained on him. You're going to lay down, face first, hands behind your head. The man didn't move. You've already ruined it, he said quietly. She was supposed to forget, start over. The dog made it harder. But I had a plan. Downstairs, Bo was pacing again. Marybeth could hear the conversation. Barely, but the tone made her skin crawl. Annie gripped her tighter, whispering, "That's him. That's the man." Clint, still sitting, turned toward Marybeth. "He's been living out here for years," he muttered. "I've seen him before. He watches people, follows hikers. I didn't know he was capable of this." Marybeth's jaw clenched. "But you didn't tell anyone." Clint looked away. "Because I didn't think anyone would believe me." Upstairs, Granger took one step closer. "Don't make this worse. This ends now." Suddenly, the man bolted into the woods. Granger chased him, radioing for backup. Suspect fleeing west on foot. Repeat. Fleeing west through the tree line near the cabin. Marybeth rushed up the stairs, yelling after him. But Bo pushed past her first, leaping through the doorway and disappearing into the woods after the man. "Bo!" Annie cried, trying to follow, but Marybeth pulled her back. "No, baby. Let him do what he does." Gunshots rang out. Two. Then silence. For a moment, time stood still. And then, footsteps. Heavy. Steady. Granger emerged from the woods, Bo at his side, panting and bloodied, but alive. "He's down," the sheriff said simply. "It's over." The cabin was sealed off within the hour. Crime scene tape, flashing lights, and a sea of voices replaced the silence that had haunted those woods. Marybeth sat on the back of an ambulance with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Annie curled up beside her, asleep at last. Bo lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws, finally calm. For the first time in hours, the world wasn't spinning. It was just still. Sheriff Granger approached, face weary but relieved. The guy's name was Martin Ellis. No family, no job history for over a decade. He'd been squatting out here, left no trace, no digital trail. "We think he picked Annie at random. Saw her, followed her, waited." Marybeth closed her eyes, holding Annie closer. "And Clint?" she asked. Granger sighed. "He's being taken in. Might not be guilty of kidnapping, but he knew something was wrong and didn't report it. That's going to follow him." Marybeth looked down at Bo. "He saved her," she said softly. Granger nodded. "That dog's a hero." Bo wagged his tail once, just barely. The moment settled between them, tragic but full of survival. Annie stirred and opened her eyes. "Mama?" she whispered. "Are we safe now?" Marybeth kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe." In the days that followed, the Whitmore home was cleaned, secured, and surrounded by a community that had learned just how quickly a quiet town could shatter. Neighbors brought meals, cards, blankets. People who'd never spoken to Marybeth before came by just to say, "I'm so sorry," and "We're here if you need anything." For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. Bo never left Annie's side after that day. He slept by her door, followed her through the house, and barked at every shadow. Marybeth didn't mind. Let him bark. Let him protect. He had earned that right, and she had learned to trust the instincts of those who can't speak, because sometimes they know more than we ever could. 1 week later, Marybeth stood on the porch watching Annie and Bo in the yard. Autumn leaves swirled around them, the sun soft in the sky. Life would never go back to how it was. But it didn't have to. They had each other. And sometimes that was enough. The danger had come and gone. The fear had passed. But love remained. And that, Marybeth knew, was what would carry them through everything still to come.